starting off the show, though, I want to dive into that Team USA win from last night. They faced off against Team Canada in the first official exhibition game for Team USA ahead of the 2024 Olympics. They end up winning this game 86-72. Neither team was necessarily gunning for this win. Team Canada kind of pulled their significant players in that fourth quarter, and win or loss didn't really mean anything as to the Olympics themselves, but I thought it was still a lot of fun to watch this all go down. And before we get into the game itself, I'm a little bit of a nerd to some degree about the international expansion of basketball. It's something that I am fascinated with and am really hoping to see it continue to take off in years to come. And last night, Team USA played a Canadian team that has 10 current NBA players. That is a record for the most ever current NBA players for any nation other than the United States. And not to mention as well that they are being coached by Jordi Fernandez, who was just named the Brooklyn Nets head coach earlier this offseason. So again, the international growth of the game is just something that I find to be fascinating, and I think it's a lot of fun that we seem like we could be getting to a place where there is, a higher level of competition across the globe. So I think that was just something that definitely stood out to me at first, seeing 5 pretty prominent NBA players in Team Canada's starting lineup. Probably going to be, if Team USA is going to face any sort of threats, Canada has to be up there in terms of level of competition. But as we sort of saw from last night, when the U.S. is clicking, I don't think that there is going to be another nation that can stop them. And, it was an ugly game for Team USA, 17 turnovers overall. We saw them get off to an awful start when they went down 11-1. They had 8 turnovers in that first quarter, and it was a pretty brutal first shift. They missed their first 6 shots, and, Kevin Durant did not play in this game because he's dealing with an injury, so I'm sure that starting lineup is going to look different moving forward inherently, because you have to imagine KD is in there. Last night it was Steph Curry, Drew Holiday, Devin Booker, LeBron James, and Joel Embiid. Would probably have to imagine that it is Holiday or Booker that is bumped out of the starting lineup. I know that, when you look at the conversation in terms of the best players in the world, Drew Holiday would sort of be the easy person to bump out of that starting lineup. But you hear about the way that the selection members of Team USA rave about Drew Holiday, that he's always a priority to try and bring in. Grant Hill was talking about it on the broadcast during the second half of that game as well. So we'll see there. I would imagine he is probably the one who gets bumped to the second unit. But, the Team USA offense just looked disjointed early on, and it's a fact. It was sort of to be expected, considering the fact that you look at the other international teams. Team US has such little cohesive experience with one another throughout these years, where Canada won the bronze medal last year in the FIBA World Cup, and they ran back just about the entire roster, and that's with a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and with a Dylan Brooks, and all of these players. Really, SGA is on a tier of his own in terms of the talent level on Team USA, on Team Canada, that is. But he was willing to play last year. He's familiar with all of these guys for Team Canada, so they have. The U.S. is maybe at a little bit of a disadvantage from that perspective, but once the U.S. is off and running, they are going to be, borderline impossible to stop. And I would have to imagine they're going to win the gold this year, but we will see. But as for, the actual makings of this roster, it was clear that the second lineup was sort of the jolt of energy that they needed, which does dive into an interesting conversation about Anthony Edwards, who, within the past week or so has had a lot of quotes about how he sees himself as the number one option on this team. And, being a 22-year-old that is not established himself in the league the same way, you sort of scoff at those comments, looking at the level of competition. But he ended up, I believe he was their leading scorer last night with 13 points. Very well-rounded effort from the U.S. But him and Jayson Tatum, it was funny because, I think that it was almost a little bit of a microcosm. You look at the first lineup, they were a little bit rusty. Obviously, they're still great and everything, but bursting onto the scene was Anthony Edwards and Jayson Tatum leading the second lineup. Anthony Davis was also tremendous off of the bench as well, but Edwards and Tatum, two of the players that have been talked about most as the future face of the league, and they were both spectacular in this game and really ignited the energy for Team USA. So again, as much as Edwards, he makes those comments about how he sees himself as the number one option, you sort of laugh at it, but at the same time, he played like it last night, and we're talking about one game. Can't imagine he's going to work his way into the starting lineup here, but he was basically Captain America last summer with the FIBA team, and that was with other established players on the roster, and he took over then, he took over last night. So gonna be interesting to see sort of the dynamics there in terms of the older generation versus the new guys. But another thing that did sort of stand out to me was the fit of Joel Embiid with this roster. He was in the starting lineup, of course, and through the first few minutes, and again, it was a very rusty start for everybody that was in the game at that point, but just how Embiid played into the rest of the starters was a little bit interesting to me. Again, when you are in a rut offensively, typically what teams do is they lean on their best player to go get you a bucket. And Joel Embiid, he looked at least like he was the clear mismatch for Team USA, where he had Dwight Powell on him. Powell, of course, on the Dallas Mavericks, sort of fell out of the rotation. But, Embiid just had a ton of size on him, and he started this game off on a pretty rough stretch. He posted up Powell twice. He missed a shot, and then Powell actually stripped him for a steal. We saw Embiid sort of jacking up a three-point attempt at one point that I didn't love either. So, Embiid ends up fouling out in the third quarter of this game, something along the lines of 15 minutes. And I'm sure that it's just going to take a little bit of adjustment for him. I have no worries as to, the caliber of player he is or anything. But I do wonder if you see Anthony Davis have a double-double with 4 blocks, and, Steve Kerr sort of praised the double big lineup of having Anthony Davis play alongside Bam Adebayo, which was interesting to me when they first rolled it out there, but that is also one of the bigger keys for the U.S. in these games is the fact that they are going to have just about an unmatched interior presence. Now, Team France with Victor Wembanyama and Rudy Gobert are going to have their names in that conversation as well, and I am fascinated to see the two of them play with one another. But again, Anthony Davis, I think, just has a little bit more of a malleable skill set, whereas Embiid, I think, is the number one option just about everywhere. So seeing how he plays into, a team setting with more talented players around him is at least something that I'm keeping an eye on. Now, again, the coaches are actually with these players through training camps and everything, so they have the best idea of the configuration of this roster. But it was something that at least kind of stood out to me a little bit. But another big standout for me was Tyrese Halliburton, and he is one of the players that I think has gotten a little bit of disrespect through these conversations about whether or not he deserves to be there, and I thought he was tremendous last night. He plays very well into the team system. Yes, he is a little bit more on ball, but I was really impressed with specifically his defense is really what caught my eye, was the fact that he was, hustling all over the place. And it makes me think that as this Pacers core continues to develop, that Halliburton does have, these skill sets, and I think, just the overall ability to mesh really well with other stars that, it's interesting because he's obviously the franchise cornerstone for Indiana, but when he wasn't asked to do quite as much creation himself, we saw the other parts of his game elevate. And that is something that, again, Halliburton, I think that him and the Pacers get so much disrespect from, the NBA community. And I really do like what they're building there. And I thought that Halliburton had himself a very nice game. But other than that, again, this was not a super high stakes event necessarily. Like I mentioned, Team Canada sort of took their foot off the gas. They were still within reach in this game, which is why, you can say this game was never really in doubt for the U.S., but also if Canada wanted to make it closer, they very possibly could have. And, the U.S. sort of mirrored a lot of the bench minutes with Canada. So, you can make the argument on either side. But it's going to be interesting to see, no doubt. Because the U.S. should be, I would say, borderline untouchable this summer. And especially as we see Kevin Durant return to play, I have a very hard time pointing to the team that is going to, step in their way. But it'll be interesting to see, without a doubt. Their qualifying group for the group stage, it's going to be them, Serbia, of course, with Nikola Jokic, and then South Sudan and Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has a couple players, but, really, eyes are going to be on that game versus Serbia on July 28th to see, Jokic versus Embiid, Jokic versus all the best players on the U.S. Now, how much help he's going to have is probably not going to be enough to take down this juggernaut, but will be interesting to see there. And then the last sort of note I did have on this game, also, the fact that, you look at the talent in terms of the players themselves, then they pan over to the coaches on the bench there at one point for Team USA. It was Steve Kerr, Eric Spoelstra was there, Mark Few of Gonzaga was there, and they had some other names in there as well that I should have marked down. But, just top, players, coaches, they just have, all of the best in the world, basically. But last note here was pretty funny to see Dillon Brooks versus LeBron James, and the arena was throwing out some boos to Dillon Brooks, who of course is a little bit, he's a lot of it probably a villain, and he fully embraces that. And him and LeBron got into a little shoving thing. There was a Team USA turnover on a pass to LeBron, and, just around at the baseline for the inbound, Brooks was trying to steal the ball from LeBron. LeBron was sort of shoving him off. So, a little bit of drama there that was pretty entertaining to see. But, other than that, let me know what you think about, the first impressions here of Team USA as they enter these Olympics. I think it's just going to be a lot of fun to watch, because actually, before we go here, the biggest moment of the game, at least in my eyes, was the lob from Steph Curry to LeBron James on the fast break. And, it's just going to be so fun to watch them play together, because again, we get these sort of types of moments in the All-Star game, but it doesn't mean anything because it's not competitive whatsoever. But this is kind of the last ride. Like, you have to imagine, you never want to put a cap on LeBron's longevity, but kind of feels like this is going to be his last Olympics at 39 years old, and Steph Curry getting up there as well. So, just appreciate this while you can, because it is crazy the amount of talent that this team has. You have, 3 all-timers, like all-timers in terms of LeBron, Curry, Kevin Durant that are going to be playing together, and we're likely never going to get this type of run with them again. So I'm really looking forward to it. I was feeling very patriotic watching the game last night. But again, let me know what your main takeaways were. But we're going to be shifting gears here to some actual conversations about the NBA itself. There are some reports that have come out over the past day or so that the Cleveland Cavaliers are potentially looking to sign forward Evan Mobley to a max contract extension. And, we've seen 3 of his 2021 draft class members already get those. So I want to give some thoughts on the Cavaliers situation in particular and the overall practice of these teams, jumping out to make sure that they lock down their guys a year ahead of time. So we are going to be diving into that, but first take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.